Welcome back, friends out there, to another session of 30 Minutes with a Mother Mystic, and welcome, Michael.
Finally, we're back. We've had various reasons for delay, but here we are back again and smiling.
Here we are, both in blue, both in front of a green backdrop, and both smiling, and both without hair. The only thing I miss is like some glasses here, and maybe a little bit more beard. So today's topic is going to be the too hard to handle basket. Michael came up with that phrase. Michael, would you like to explain this?
Well, what I mean by the too hard to handle basket, as we go through life, we're faced with a lot of emotional issues, every one of us. Nobody escapes that. And some of those emotional things are too hard to deal with. And so we put them deep down in the too hard to handle basket, deciding, okay, I'll deal with them when when it's appropriate. And gradually that basket gets fuller and fuller. And then suddenly, bang, we're hit by a car and dead. Well, guess what? That basket doesn't empty itself, it's still full. And when we come back in the next incarnation, we bring it with us. Well, now we're in what you could almost say the end of times. We're at the end of a great cycle and the beginning of a new one. And those who are determined to keep the emotional basket full will follow their path of consciousness. There's no judgment in this. We each create our own life, literally. But then there are those of us who choose to, I want to go ahead, I want to take the high road. And so I want to deal with this and what's in the emotional basket. And that's simply an intent because you really don't know how to pull it out. But once you set the intent, in this incarnation, I want to deal with my emotional stuff. I'd like to empty that basket. And that's a big ask, I can tell you. Then it starts to arise. And basically, I've been going through that for the last 3 months. And I'll be honest, Sascha, as a spiritual teacher, I thought I'd pretty well done with it. I didn't really think I had much in there, but I had plenty.
So let's get right into this. And I think that's maybe one of the areas where most viewers would have questions. How can you be spiritually enlightened and having discovered unconditional love and having gone through these things that you've previously mentioned and still have an emotional basket? Would you be carrying this in some etheric layer of your body that was not previously cleaned?
Yeah, I mean, if you look on a human, even the soul is a bit like an onion. There's layer after layer after layer. And I would be very surprised if there are any enlightened people on this planet who have nothing in their emotional basket. You know, we don't finish here. This is just a classroom on the way. And it's surprising. You can be spiritually enlightened and still not know what unconditional love is. Right. And I didn't realize that once, but you can do. And you can be spiritually enlightened and have serious emotional issues. And I could name a fair few spiritual teachers who are no longer with us who had those issues, but I won't. I'm not going to get personal. And so that's definitely very, very possible. There's absolutely no room for complacency. And the spiritual teacher who says, I'm done, has proved they're wrong because they're still here. You know, there's stuff to do. And I have to admit, I didn't expect, but just to give you one example, when I was a boy, no, let's leave that. We'll jump to when I was a young man. I married, and my father built a house for my wife and I on the farm, which I expected to inherit. And so the house and my car was mine. Well, along he comes and gets cancer, and he died. And suddenly the house is not mine. He died with no will, so the farm isn't mine. Not even my car was mine. The only thing was mine was my clothes that I'd actually bought with my own money. And at the time, I felt a deep disappointment, but I just shoved it down. Okay, this is the way the cookie crumbled. Today, I'm extremely grateful, but that's beside the point. You know, that's as many years later. And then at a certain stage, my cousin told me that my brother took one of my aunts to the solicitor so that she could change her will to cut me out. And so I was disinherited by all the family. And the fact that my brother assisted in that felt like a complete betrayal. But I decided I wouldn't believe it. I'm not going to believe this. And my mother, you've got to realize there's no blame, no resentment, no anger. My mother went and had a hysterectomy when I was 15, and there was no hormone replacements in those days. And she had the full works. And the woman who went in was a loving, kind, sweet woman that I'd known for 15 years. A woman came back, hormones completely all over the place, was a bitter, angry, aggressive woman. It's like I lost my mother. And in a way, I felt betrayed there. And there's a couple of incidents with my more recent family where I felt betrayed. And every time I forgive, I pushed it down. Well, it's all come up. And when it came up, it was like, when I had a homeopathic kinesiology friend, and he was looking at me just recently, a week or so ago. And we were working on things, and there were three main things going on in my body. One was I have a seriously bad history of heavy metal and chemical spray abuse, down to my own foolishness. And yet my father had put me in the first situation, which has killed ever so many farm workers, from farmer's lung and various things. I somehow felt more betrayal about that. Why would he do that to his son? I can only put it down to ignorance. Again, there was no anger, but there was a sense of betrayal. And so he was working with me and he said, well, so the first one was all the chemicals. The second one, he said I tested positive to long COVID, which I've since taken a thing and it cured it, homeopathic cure, and it worked. And the third one was family. And that was the shock. Family, my family, I've got no issues with my family. And boy, as I sat back and relaxed, it came out of my solar plexus like oily black smoke. And I could hear and see the word betrayal in it. And I just went downhill after that. But in that moment, it was all gone. And I forgave everybody, but there was nothing to forgive because I didn't blame. I didn't feel any anger or resentment. There was nothing to really forgive. But it came out of me, and that was a lot in that too hard to handle basket.
Right. So let's stay there for a second. What is it then? If you're not blaming, and if you still have that kind of traumatizing emotional moment and you carry it with you because you've just shoved it down,
yeah, I get your point.
What is it? Is it?
I think I know what it is. I think it's a form of hurt, of deep hurt, because it's always personal. It's your father, it's your brother, it's people you know deeply. And I think there's a deep sense of hurt. Now, as we get older, if we grow spiritually, we don't take things so personally. But when you're in your 20s, everything is very personal, unless you're absolutely exceptional. And as to the word betrayal, I hadn't even thought of it. But that was what came out. And as I looked at it, yes, it sort of made sense. There was a sense of betrayal. But under betrayal, obviously, I think there's a deep and personal hurt. And for me, it was very easily released. But God, I'm 86 in a couple of weeks, and it had been there all that time and didn't really interfere with my life. But going forward into a higher consciousness, it had no place. It was malignant.
And going back,
and it is those malignant emotions that turn into malignant diseases.
Right. And so going back to what we had originally spoken about, how um, enlightenment and the experience of unconditional love can still leave you with that basket full of stuff. I'm curious, I would like to talk about that a little more, because most of us, I think, are under the impression that when you go through the experience of enlightenment, that kind of wipes the slate clean, and at least I think most people are under the impression that you have kind of dissolved your stuff, right?
Okay.
So
Yeah.
what's the relationship between enlightenment and also the second stage of enlightenment, which you call the discovery of unconditional love, let's say, um, and this basket? Like, how can you be there but still have that basket with you? Or is it just the body that stores it? What's your perspective on this?
Well, first, definitely to the very end of all that, the body stores it. Yes, it's in a deep cellular level. There's no doubt. I mean, clearly there isn't a basket there. And yet the solar plexus, which is the emotional chakra, is where, for me, this came out. But let's look at it. Spiritual enlightenment is exactly that. I know who I am. You know who you are. You realize the identity and personality is just a game we play. The personality, of course, persists longer, but identity, you have to use it. But you have this deep knowing that you're not an identity. You realize your immortality, your eternity, and there's a deep, very deep, firm basis of knowing self. And that expands out in ways of what I would call direct knowing. Now, unconditional love is then completely and totally in love with self, because at this stage you know that self is humanity, self is the world. In fact, self is the universe. It's no longer conceptual, it's an experience. It's an experiential, ongoing moment in you. And so, and how could they not empty out the emotions? The simple fact is that you have to bring your consciousness to say, I want to clean, I want to be emotionally imbalanced. I wish to have my emotional junk cleaned out. And all you can do then is make the intent and release it, because you can't go digging in there because you don't know what you're digging for. It's like, if it's good to, in Australia, you can dig for gold, but it really helps if you happen to be on a where there is gold to dig down. You're more likely to find it. It's a big place. And it's the same with the emotions. We just don't know what's in there. If we did, we would dealt with it earlier. And so it comes out, people would say the unconscious, it comes out, there is no unconscious. Consciousness is, you can't un it. But it comes out the deepest layers of the subconscious. So it's old stuff. For instance, what I described to you of my parents, it didn't begin there. It would have begun many incarnations earlier. And somehow always something happens to bring it back to your awareness again. And so it doesn't become so residual, it's deeply unknown. It's in your consciousness, sort of revived in your consciousness each incarnation, where we look on it as the first time. But it's deep old stuff. And so the subconscious lets it go. And it also, if you're lucky, it lets it go at the appropriate time when you're able to deal with it. You know, if it's dealt with in one rush, that's nice, rather than have to go through a whole lot of stuff to deal with it. Well, as I say, it's basically the number one killer. It's behind every disease there is. That there is suppressed emotions.
Would you say that emptying your emotional basket and striving for emotional balance could be path to enlightenment, or vice versa, that your
That's a
enlightenment
good
could,
one.
yeah,
That's a
or
good,
yes, or vice versa, like in your case, you first had basically your spiritual enlightenment, then you had unconditional love experience, and then now you begin to even empty further your basket. So, but I think the average path would be the other way around, where people would be.
The whole process, of course, of growth has been moving through emotions. I got out a heck of a lot of stuff. This is really deep stuff. But I've often said that if you were to focus on emotional balance, you would grow spiritually. But if you were to focus on spirituality only, I'm not sure that you would emotionally deal with stuff, only that which arose naturally. And so I think emotional balance is hugely important. I don't mean any condemnation of emotions. It's just simply bringing emotions to a place of balance. And mine are very well balanced, but in that balance, underneath that can still be the deeper issues. And if you're a spiritual teacher, then it's deeply in my consciousness that if you're not growing in consciousness, you can talk about spiritual things, but you're not really a spiritual teacher. You need to be growing in consciousness. So for me, this is all part of the growing in consciousness of me. And maybe because that's the way I see life, I've precipitated it. It's so good, let's bring it out.
Which kind of answers the question that I was about to ask you, which is a lot of people also in the spiritual space, when they think of enlightenment, they think of it as their ultimate goal.
Yeah.
And I think you are a good living example of that is just one step on your path. But
well, I was one of those people. I
right,
thought it was the
right,
ultimate goal. When I
right,
got there, I learned, it isn't.
right. And so my question would have been, having gone through spiritual enlightenment, having discovered unconditional love, now going through these emotional cleansing processes, how would you define your growth or your goal as a spiritual teacher? What's next? Is it emotional balance? Is it just plain growth in consciousness? Or what is your soul striving for now? Is it just the biggest potential expression of consciousness and growth? Or
I don't really have a goal. I don't set up anything like that. It's just an unfolding in the moment. But I do have a certain ambition that I want to be here to see this complete changeover from one age into another. I'd like to see that through. That could take another 20 years to complete itself, because I don't think we've reached flashpoint yet. I think we're going to reach a flashpoint in humanity, which I think will be fairly brief, but I don't think many people are going to enjoy it. But I don't feel we've reached that yet. And so I want to be here to go all through that. And if I'm not, then I really don't mind, because I'm not attached to that. But I would like that to happen.
no more videos though.
I find that when you really have this spiritual energy in you, there are no attachments. And you might say, I would like such and such, but there are no threads on it. If it unfolds, it unfolds. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. It's sometimes, it's like our dear friend that we both know, who's just moved on. For me, the last 6 months of her life were an absolute triumph, because they took her from the deepest concepts of spirituality into the experience. And it was necessary, absolutely necessary. And yet some people think, why would a beautiful soul like that have to go through so much pain and suffering? Well, it was part of the course that had been avoided, and it is as it is. And I just see the final end was an absolute triumph, and made my heart glow with pride for that person. I just felt, wow, you've done it. And I wanted them to know that, but they know anyway.
Yeah.
Now,
I feel the same way.
yeah.
Now I was going to ask something else. You kind of went off on a tangent there, but I was going to continue. Yes, okay, so emotional balance and the basket. When we go through these experiences of emotional cleansing, when we take out things from our basket, there's a certain way of doing that. But what is, in your opinion, the best way to avoid even putting things in the basket? You know, if you are lucky enough to watch this video, and we can give people some advice on basically how to deal with hurting events, emotionally traumatizing events. Like, how do you notice that you're actually shoving it down? How do you notice that you're putting it in the basket? And what are ways to deal with it immediately to not do it?
You're asking me if I could tell you how not to be human and how not to be a child before you're an adult.
Share
I
some
don't,
of these 86
I
years of
don't,
wisdom with
I
us now.
don't think there is a way to avoid emotional issues. That's part of our growth. And taking them on and dealing with them is part of the growth of the human being. You've got to remember that our emotions are unique. I have never met any other beings, and I've met quite a lot metaphysically, who have emotions like us. And our emotions are a rich tapestry that one day will become our language. We won't, the mental will have synthesis, will have become one with the emotions, and our language will be 1,000 times richer than it is now, because in the telepathy, the emotional content can come through. And so we're still developing that. So I don't think there is a way, but I would have to say you can reduce the amount of emotional pain by not personalizing everything, realizing most people, it's not personal to you, it's personal to them.
Right.
All their insults is really about them and not about you.
And that's a very
And
important point.
to depersonalize, which I was completely unable to do as a young man. Everything was hugely personal. If there was two or more gathered, it was always in my name, horribly negatively personal. So I can say what you should do now, but I couldn't do it. And the other thing I would say would be to, as much as possible, instead of getting deeply involved in the emotions, realize how emotional you're getting and just back off and look at it and ask, do I really need to go there? Do I need to do deep hurt, deep anger? It's better to do it lightly. So maybe choosing love instead of all these emotions. But hey, we're human, and this is part of being human. And eventually it will all come out, but the idea is to live without having a basket to shove the stuff down in. So as your emotions come and you feel certain hurts that somebody said, is released immediately because you love. So love is like a light that shines through hurt, and in shining through it tends to erase it. But hey, I mean, I didn't learn what that love is
So
until
if
far more
Michael,
recently.
if that Michael back then who was betrayed, and in that moment that he felt betrayed, would have had your current 86-year-old Michael wisdom,
You're
what would he?
pretty
Huh?
You're pretty astute here, because actually there's something else going on as well. You see, that was Michael's pain rather than Mixael.
Right.
But Michael is gradually now, Mixael is moving in much more strongly. And so the Michael energy in the cells is being pushed out. That's what's bringing all this up in me.
I'm
I
not
wasn't going to mention that, but it's complicated.
I'm not sure if listeners are even aware of that circumstance, but what I was going to ask, if that Michael back then would have had your current level of wisdom, how would he have dealt with it differently? Let's just take that, let's just take that very moment where he found out that his father passed away, and all that he thought was his was suddenly not his anymore. And there was this deep sense of betrayal and hurt. And what would have been the wise way of taking this on, of looking at it?
You know what my dad used to say? You can't put an old head on young shoulders. In other words, you can't put wisdom in youth.
Yeah.
Some youth has it, but then they're not youth. They have young bodies and old souls. and there's quite a lot of them around now. And so they have the wisdom of ages, even though their bodies are young. But I'm afraid my body was young, and I'm not too. The soul potential was there, but I hadn't reached it. Not until my mid-30s that I connected with that, and everything began to change. So in my 20s, there was no other choice. I'm not, trying to be clever here. There was no other choice. I was hurt, deeply hurt, and it went in. And I guess gradually it shaped itself into some sense of betrayal, because there were previous incarnations where betrayal was rampant. And
Right.
so it all mixed in together.
But from your current perspective, just to give some practical advice on how someone could deal with a situation like this, would you just say, okay, my dad had his own story of emotional suffering. He was a hurt person, and it's not personal. That's what you would kind of advise?
That's good. If you could dialogue it through, well, my dad, he did the best he could. And why he didn't make a will, I have no idea. But maybe one day I'll look back and say, thank you, Dad, for not making a will. That's the best thing that happened. I reached that. To me, then, it was the end of my life world. Everything that I dreamed of was completely erased. It was devastating. But that devastation was exactly what I needed. So if you were to sort of sneak a bit of your future wisdom and put it in your skull, you could sort of say, well, I don't get this. I don't understand it at all, but I'm going to trust that this is for my greater good. And you know what? Just about every time you will be right.
I think that's a very good one. I think we could just repeat that one more time. So every time you experience any kind
Every
of
time
emotional,
it seems you're in a disaster and it's all gone wrong, also bring up the thought, but how do I know it all hasn't gone perfectly right? I'm just not yet at the point where I can see that. Almost guaranteed one day you'll look back and every episode that was negative in my life and terrible, I can today look back and say, wow, thank you. Didn't enjoy it, but it was exactly what was needed at that moment to bring me to being who I am today.
yeah, I couldn't
So,
agree more. I agree 100%.
yeah, yeah, it doesn't seem like it when you're in it, but later it comes. See, even this young man who's sitting here with me, even he's experiencing that already.
Yeah, I think the difficulty is that it's emotionally overwhelming, and
Yeah,
the difficulty is to detach yourself from that emotional overwhelming.
that's what overwhelming means. You're overwhelmed. It's like a tidal wave has hit you, knocked you flat on the sand, and hey, you can't get up straight away. And eventually you stand up, and once again you can breathe, and we continue on. So, and I'd say don't be too frightened of the too hard to handle basket. Just if you're ready to empty it, set the intent and let life bring it up. And it'll bring it up organically as is appropriate and as you can deal with it. It won't throw at you what you can't deal with. It
Now,
might know you're stronger than you think you are, but that's all part of it.
we have just a couple more minutes, maybe 2, 3 more minutes, and maybe we can give listeners and viewers a practical piece of advice on how to deal with those things that you take out of the basket. Should you visualize anything particular when you have that emotion in front of you? Should you make an effort to let it go? What would you have any ideas, like almost like a technique, like a visualization or something that would be helpful when these things come up when you have them in front of
I
you?
think I think when it comes up, the emotion makes the moment rather than we make the thing. Like for me, I was just aware of this like black smoky stuff. I reckon I'm about as psychic as the average brick, and yet nevertheless I saw this smoky stuff come out, and there was an emotion with it, a rush of emotion. Some tears came, a rush of emotion, betrayal, all over in 30 seconds, done, finished. There was nothing more to work with. It was done. It
Yeah.
had come out. And so I would say, as you feel a release, go with it. Just really be with it. And then don't try to make emotions. Oh my God, I feel so emotionally overwhelmed. This is so wonderful. Just let it go and be gone. As if you dived in a swimming pool and came straight out the other end and you're dry straight away. And you say, this is wonderful. I don't know quite how I got dry, but I am. And this is wonderful. It's gone and it's finished. And that is the letting go. We tend to play with our emotions. Just when it's gone, let it go. Don't turn it into an exercise where you've all got to chant Om for the next half an hour and all stuff like that. Let it be gone naturally, as nature would intend. A breeze or wind rips through a tree, and then suddenly it's gone and the tree's calm again. And it's not all agitated. Oh my God, what was that? Oh my, nobody told me that was coming. It's just calm again. We can be the same. The emotion comes through, is gone. We relax and say, ah, that feels better. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I think that was a very nice conversation. And by the way, did you notice that there are branches growing out of your shoulders?
Oh, yes. I'm branching out all over the place.
You seem pretty human still. Thank you so much, everybody out there. And make sure to subscribe and like to support us and keep up these videos and comment below, of course. Share this video and see you in the next episode. Thank you.
And thank you, folks.